The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise, your AML automation software for faster onboarding, smarter monitoring, and growth without overhead.
I think the big one that people are always shocked when you talk to them is the real estate sector.
Yeah.
People just are shocked that Australia, a country that has so much foreign investment in real estate, has just had no AML supervision up until now. Some interesting clips on social media of how they behave because they've made huge amounts of money over time. I think a lot of that has been through dirty money, and that whole sector is about to get a really big shake-up.
Money make a world go round.
Welcome to The Laundry, the podcast connecting AML, compliance, and financial crime to the real world. It's time to turn our world upside down.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free.
Or, more accurately, to turn our attention to what's happening right now in Australia. Earlier this year, the Australian government passed the new AML and CFT rules that will drastically increase the number of businesses regulated by AUSTRAC, the country's financial intelligence agency. Lawyers, accountants, and real estate agents, as well as those in precious metals and virtual assets, are all now obliged to report and comply with these new rules. So, will this drastically impact the flow of dark money in the Aussie economy, or just create paperwork headache for SMEs? I'm Marit, CEO of Strise, and in this episode we are asking what happens when 90,000 new businesses become AML regulated. We'll be discussing how will these new rules impact businesses of all sizes in Australia, what are the biggest challenges in implementing them, and how this will actually impact the flow of dirty money in Australia. To dive into this topic, I'm here with Adam Vilaça, Director and Special Counsel, Ryva AI. Adam is a qualified lawyer admitted in Australia and New Zealand with over a decade of experience. He has worked for a number of consultancies in the financial crime space and previously joined the podcast to draw on his experience of burnout as an MLRO. Welcome back to The Laundry, Adam. It's a great pleasure to having you back.
Thanks, Marit. Great to be here in Oslo.
Yes, and we will be discussing a topic that is literally happening on the other side of the world in Australia, where you are from.
Yes, it's all happening in Australia at the moment, but good to be in Oslo beforehand.
Let's start by looking at all these planned changes in Australia and why this is happening right now. So, can't you give us the best summary of what these new AML CFT rules actually are?
Yeah, so Australia is a founding member of FATF, so they were involved in AML regulation from the start and have been an active member globally. The current AML CTF legislation in Australia passed in 2006, but it was what was called Tranche 1, so it mainly impacted the financial services sector as well as gambling and a few others. So Australia's been quite late to the party to regulate the gatekeeper profession, so lawyers, accountants, real estate, and also developments with virtual assets, like you mentioned. So it's the second half of the legislation, and with that, the Australian government's reforming the existing legislation and rules.
Okay, and why is this happening right now? Is there any context around the timing of it?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some pressure on Australia internationally to bring the gatekeeper professions into scope. There's a very small list of countries that haven't regulated gatekeeper professions to date, and Australia's on a very undesirable list of countries that haven't done it. So,
who are some of the peers?
Oh, I think that some of them are China is one of them. I think there's a few others that Australia wouldn't want to be compared to. So there's a bit of pressure both internationally and domestically to bring this into scope. So I think there's been a lot of issues with money laundering around property in particular, and also money coming in from Asia and the impact that's having on property. So not only is the Australian government having pressure placed on it from overseas, there's people within Australia that are asking questions as well.
You mentioned real estate. Let's just double click on that for a second, because that is actually one of the fastest growing occupations in Australia.
Yeah, so the real estate market in Australia is going crazy, and housing affordability is a big issue.
The Australian dream. There's nothing wrong with these auctions or the people at them. But lax standards around money laundering have put our real estate and economy at risk and might be inflating our housing market.
Now, if you're a prospective buyer and you get outbid by someone with a bag of cash, that's pretty suspicious and arguably increasing the price for everyone.
Real estate professionals, along with lawyers, accountants and gem dealers, aren't subject to anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing laws and don't have to report suspicious transactions. It's easier to launder money through property here than in our neighbours like New Zealand. Financial crimes agency AUSTRAC estimates about $1 billion in suspicious money from China was invested in Australian real estate in a single year.
And without going into the politics of it, the re-elected government in Australia was angling that part of the reason why people can't afford a house is because there is a bit of dirty money floating around. And I think the latest estimates were there's around 47 billion Australian dollars worth of dirty money that's coming through Australia at the moment. So,
and a lot of it through real estate.
Yeah, a lot of it through real estate. So if you look traditionally, AUSTRAC's had a very good record of enforcing against the banks and the gambling and casino sector. But in order to really round that off and to comply with the FATF obligations, it's time that the gatekeeper professions are regulated as well.
So that is, you mentioned tranche 1, and this is then tranche 2. What is it exactly?
So tranche 2 is bringing into scope those 3 sectors and a few other smaller ones, so primarily real estate, accounting and the legal sectors. But what also AUSTRAC is doing is looking to simplify the existing rules. So the Australian AML CTF Act and rules is around about 700 pages of legislation, which is not light reading. What we're looking to do is to strip that back a bit and make it less prescriptive and more risk-based. So similar to the approach that you see in the UK and other jurisdictions. So tranche 2 is not just about bringing other sectors into scope. It's also about trying to make the rules a bit more simplistic and give businesses a little bit more freedom in the way in which they apply them to their business. I think that the largest change is now going to be the number of firms that are regulated for financial crime.
I said in the intro 90,000 that will be now regulated. Is that number accurate?
Yeah, that number is accurate. So I think the existing portfolio supervision for AUSTRAC is around sort of, I think it's between 15 and 17,000 mark. So from next year, AUSTRAC's portfolio for supervision will be well over 100,000 firms. Which is comparable with the size of the FCA in Australia.
Yeah.
Have the population of the UK. So it's a big task for AUSTRAC from next year for the supervision expectations they're going to have as a regulator. Australia is unique in the sense that AUSTRAC is both the financial crime regulator and the FIU, so they serve both those purposes, unlike some other countries.
Yeah, in a lot of countries, that's like very two distinct
roles. Yeah, not in Australia. So that's it's one unique thing about.
We should definitely drill down a bit on that. But back to these 90,000 businesses. Yeah. What is the sentiment on the ground among these 90,000 businesses?
Yeah, I think look, there's been quite a bit of denial up until recently. The rules only came out as we record this about two or 3 weeks ago. The rules were refining what the principles that were outlined in the core legislation, which has already been in existence since 2006 and 2007. But the feeling on the ground now is I think people are starting to become aware of it. Some businesses are more proactive than others. AUSTRAC's trying to be a proactive regulator. They're going to introduce some toolkits for business by the end of the year. There's more guidance yet to come. However, I think there's a lot of denial still that this is something that we can worry about next year. And for all of us sort of seasoned AML professionals, we know that it takes a lot to become compliant in the AML space. It's not just about KYC. You know, you've got to train your people. You've got to screen your own staff.
The culture of compliance that we have covered a lot. Tone from the top.
All of those things, suspicious matter reporting.
Yeah.
And also Australia has a very intense reporting regime. So
more intense than here in Europe?
Yeah, there's certain reports that you have to report to AUSTRAC that you don't see in other territories. So, for example, you've got threshold transaction reporting. You've also got international fund transfer instructions, which are any amount of currency that leaves Australia, you have to report to AUSTRAC, which you don't see in other territories. So there's a lot of reporting that businesses have never had to do before. And I think it's going to be a reality check for firms from the 1st of July next year.
A little sidetrack, but I do want to touch upon it. And that is what you mentioned, that in Australia, AUSTRAC has this dual role.
Yeah.
Well, you obviously have a lot of experience from the UK, you've seen the European way, but how would you compare the two, if it's even possible?
Yeah, I think looking at AUSTRAC's record against the financial services sector and gambling, I mean, you know, comparing that to the UK, you're already dealing with two different regulators in the UK. From a conduct perspective, that sits within AUSTRAC. AUSTRAC have big teeth. They can issue big fines. They have some very serious powers under the legislation, and that's going to be extended to the additional sectors from next year. So that is one big difference. And I think too, one good thing about the way that Australia regulates financial crime is that it is under one roof. So all of the knowledge and intelligence sits in one place, and it's not as fragmented as we see in the UK. And I think there's been criticism of the FCA and some of the other AML regulators in the UK and their sort of fragmented approach. You don't see that in Australia. You do see a core group of professionals who take it very seriously and are prepared to issue fines when they need to.
And in terms of resources, I mean, you touched upon the reporting regime, but is the regulator properly staffed and have enough resources to actually be handling all of this new reporting and demand of these 90,000 businesses suddenly finding themselves under this legislation?
Yeah, so the Australian government has increased the resources of AUSTRAC significantly. They were given a few $100 million Australian dollars to increase their headcount and resourcing. I know they've been recruiting. If you look at AUSTRAC as a business unit of the Australian government, they've brought in record fines on a global scale. So I think the government can see it as a positive for the Treasury. And I think businesses need to be aware of that because they have a mandate to go out and get fines, and they want to prove to FATF come the end of next year that they're willing and able to use the powers that they have.
Yeah, so it's actually on, they know they have their eyes on them from like a global perspective too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you look at some of the big fines that have been issued in Australia to, in particular, the banks. I think the Westpac fine was 1.2 billion Australian dollars. So that's around 700 million pounds.
Westpac failed to carry out appropriate customer due diligence on high-risk transactions to the Philippines and Southeast Asia concerning known financial indicators relating to potential child exploitation risks.
Innocent children have been harmed.
AUSTRAC told the federal court a Westpac customer made more than 600 payments totalling nearly $136,000 in repeated patterns consistent with child exploitation. Another opened a number of Westpac accounts after serving a custodial sentence for child exploitation and transferred money to a person in the Philippines who was later arrested for child trafficking.
That makes the fines of NatWest and those sorts of big UK banks look quite small in comparison. And I think we're seeing it now also in the gambling sector. There's the first litigation that's being run by a gambling firm, Star Casino, in Australia. They're taking it to the federal court, and if they lose that, there's the potential it will actually sink a casino. So
wow. So they have teeth, like you said.
They have teeth. And I think the biggest shift for Australian businesses to see those teeth now applied to real estate lawyers and accountants. And I think you look at the national risk assessment for Australia, real estate and property has been deemed very high risk for money laundering. Mm-hmm. So I think that, in particular, property and real estate will need to be very aware from next year that these rules are coming.
Yeah, so they need to be vigilant.
Yeah, they need to be vigilant. And I think the Australian Federal Police and other law enforcement agencies have cracked down on some of these gangs in the past. However, they're going to have a whole range of new intelligence from the middle of next year under the reforms.
True.
So we're likely to see a lot more enforcement.
Just before we move on, what other things are on the national risk assessment? What are the other high risk money laundering?
Yeah, so all of the usual suspects you'll see in there, anything to do with cash, gold, all of the things that you expect to see in a national risk assessment are on there. I think the big one that people are always shocked when you talk to them is the real estate sector.
Yeah.
People just are shocked that Australia, a country that has so much foreign investment in real estate, has just had no AML supervision up until now. And real estate agents who have, there's been some interesting clips on social media of how they behave because they've made huge amounts of money over time. I think a lot of that has been through dirty money, and that whole sector is about to get a really big shake-up.
So we would recommend our listeners to go now and just search for Australian real estate agents on your social media platform of choice, and funny things will come up.
There's some hilarious ones, in particular Western Sydney, with some shady real estate agents, hiring Lamborghinis outside houses to just try and convince people to buy, and anonymous cash buyers turning up and buying property.
It was that easy to buy property in Australia. You could just take your cash and buy a house.
I've seen, when I started practicing law in Australia, I had a Chinese national who turned up with literally a suitcase of cash for his deposit. who said he was a student, and it was banked in the trust account. It was reported as a threshold transaction, but and this is a good example where I found that suspicious, but that's never been an obligation to report to AUSTRAC. That's going to change from next year. So you'll start to see those gatekeeper professions being required by law to submit a suspicious matter report, which is the Australian equivalent of a SAR.
So if you are in the real estate business and you do take a lot of cash deposits when you sell a house, you should be a little bit listening extra carefully.
I hope people from the real estate sector are listening to this. I don't think that the AML is their primary concern, but I hope they're starting to listen
maybe
in.
It will be next year. But okay, we will be right back to talk about how this will look in practice and the challenges for Australian businesses ahead. Don't go anywhere. Strise turns KYB from a costly burden into an automated winner. But don't just take my word for it. Let's hear what one of Europe's largest payment companies, Vipps Mobile Pay, has to say.
In the olden days, there were people sitting there Googling the company name, all the brand names, the CEO and so on. I think they used more effort into the process than evaluating the outcome, and that's what I'm looking for. I would say Strise definitely helped us improve our productivity. So working more efficiently, working more risk-based, automating repetitive processes, and by this helping us, of course, to decrease costs, but also improve customer satisfaction. Being able to make low-risk decisions automated without long waiting times, that's of course extremely important. Strise, one tool that works in all our markets, that we are able to collaborate, to have streamlined processes, to have optimized processes, to have one tool, one source of truth that is collecting all the input from a lot of other sources, so you don't need to open 3 different tools, but everything consolidated one place. Either you are part of the scalable automation game and work risk-based as everyone else, or you will not survive the competition. Strise is really helping us realizing those ambitions and goals.
Explore the AML Automation Cloud. Visit strise.ai for more information. Welcome back, listener. We've talked about some of the aspects of the new rules, but let's now look at how it will work in practice and some of the challenges. So, the new rules are set to come into effect on July 1st, 2026, so very soon. Do you see all the businesses impacted ready by then?
I think it's going to be a challenge. I think AUSTRAC accept that. In the conversations that I've had with them, they understand there's going to be a period of adjustment. I think no business is going to have it 100% perfect on July 1. Some businesses might, but not many will.
Just the ones who had like, my New Year's resolution is to be the best at AML.
Exactly, and I don't know how many businesses had that. I think the fact that we're still talking to businesses today who are getting their head around the legislation and what it means for them. But no, I think there's going to be a number of businesses that are not prepared. I think what AUSTRAC want to see is that businesses are at least starting to think about these things, and at least start to think about their AML CTF program. 31st of March next year is when the registration or the process opens for businesses to register as a regulated business with AUSTRAC commence. So they've got from the 31st of March to the 1st of July to organise their compliance. But the expectation is from the 1st of July next year, which is the beginning of the Australian financial year. The new financial year, they'll be compliant from that day forward. So there's a lot of work for firms to do to become compliant by the 1st of July.
Yeah. And the last time you were on the laundry, as I said in the intro, we touched upon MLRO burnout. So what do you think life will be like for all these MLROs in these 90,000 businesses next year?
Absolutely. I mean, Australia likes to change the terminology that we use across the globe.
Really? So it's not called MLRO?
No, MLCOs under the Australian legislation, but essentially doing the same role. I mean, there's going to need to be 90,000 odd new MLCOs out there. I think sole traders are excluded from appointing an MLCO. They have to be the MLCO themselves.
Yeah, of course.
But with that comes, a new set of obligations. I think things will be simplified for sole traders, but there's going to be a new position out there for people who probably don't know they're about to get it. And I'm talking to a few people in Australia who are nervous about becoming that new MLCO. They don't want the responsibilities, and it's going to create conversations within their business as to whether they're suitable and prepared to do that.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking.
It's a huge undertaking, and it takes experts takes experts time to get their head around the legislation, let alone people who've never worked in the financial crime AML space before.
I mean, you touched upon in the beginning, we talked about how much resources the regulator has gotten, like a couple $100 million Australian dollars, but have they staffed up? Are they ready then July 1st to start giving out fines for all these companies who aren't on top of it? Or what do you think, if you look into the future, what do you think, July 1st, 2026 will look like?
Yeah, obviously I can't speak on behalf of AUSTRAC, but I know from people that who work there that they're very busy at the moment. They are well resourced as an Australian government department, as I understand, and I think they'll be in a good position. But again, they'll be going through a period of adjustment themselves with the new regulations. Although they've helped, obviously been closer to the drafting of them than the rest of industry, they're still going to have a period of adjustment because the rules have changed from the existing tranche 1 version.
So it's not going to be fines from right away.
No, but I think there'll definitely be a push. I think my view is that there'll be, from the 1st of July, whilst there'll be some sort of soft compliance, I know there's a 4-week sort of window where there's a soft compliance period. From August onwards, anyone who is just outright not engaging in the process will be at the top of AUSTRAC's list, is my prediction. FATF arrive in Australia at the end of next year for their on-site for the country.
Okay. When will that be?
I think it commences in December next year.
Okay. So Australia as a whole, and the political parties are under pressure.
Exactly, and I think
because what for those who don't know, it might be some of our listeners who don't know, what would be the consequence for Australia if FATF is like, no, you guys are on the grey list?
Well, if Australia was on the grey list, I think there was, and this was part and parcel why it was pushed through Parliament at the end of last year. It was that the economic cost to Australia's GDP would be huge. I think there were estimates in the sort of, have a 1 to 1.5% knock on GDP potentially. So, if Australia was to join the grey list, it would mean enhanced monitoring, enhanced due diligence for international transactions from other countries. It would mean the cost of borrowing goes up. It would mean a whole bunch of other things that are unpleasant for Australia. And I think the Australian government took that very seriously at the end of last year, and they have pushed it through. I think the biggest criticism from everyone who works in the AML world and industry was that this has just been done very quickly. And it's probably been successive governments that have kicked this into the long grass, and now it's being done last minute.
Okay. Everyone looking to Australia next year to see how this will all play out. But you have a lot of experience from the industry to these businesses in Australia, or some
MLCOs, yeah.
MLCOs. What will be your top tips to kind of get started on this?
Top tips, I think, definitely is data to start with. Firms really need to understand the data within their business, customer data, transaction data, even employee data. That's going to be one of the biggest things that they need to understand. Documentation is another big one, making sure that their AML CTF program, which is the big legal document you need to have, is up to scratch and complies with the new regulations that are coming in. And then due diligence, making sure that the due diligence you're performing is proportionate, adequate, and compliant. Like I said, the rules only changed a few weeks ago, so we now know that there's going to be changes to the way KYC and KYB needs to be performed. It's now to a slightly lesser standard. It's to a reasonable standard, but then that creates new questions for business. Well, what does KYC perform to a reasonable standard actually mean?
We talked about it a bit beforehand, because now in the newly released rules, where they kind of slacked up a bit on some data points, because you told me that initially it was like, oh, you need confirmation on place of birth.
There's been a few iterations of the rules. So the AUSTRAC have been quite good in going out to industry and consulting, and there was a proposal at one point that firms would need to confirm as part of KYC. They need to confirm and verify place of birth for natural persons, which would have meant birth
so much work
and passports, which for every compliance officer out there, they can have a sigh of relief that that's not in place now. But the new rules state certain expectations of collection of information, and the verification of that is in general to be done to a reasonable standard. So I think for new MLCOs who have never worked in this space, it's going to be difficult for them because they're not used to dealing with this. But for existing AML experts, they know what's reasonable and unreasonable, and this does make life probably a little bit easier for some of those firms that have struggled in Australia in the past.
Top tips, just to circle back to that, is start with the data, get an overview.
Start with the data, get a good overview, understand who your core team is, make sure you've got a plan, document it.
And then do diligence.
And then do your due diligence. Make sure your due diligence is working, test it, and make sure, in 3 months' time, I would probably be at least playing around with a few sample clients, even though you're not required. If you're a tranche 2 entity, if you're not required, at least start to try and trial KYC and KYB with some of your clients. I think there'll be a lot of pushback from the 1st of July from the general Australian public saying, why am I being asked all these questions that I've never had to answer before? But there's a role for government in that.
And especially if they do believe that it's, linked to the cost of living or real estate prices and these kind of things, try to paint the picture of how this is connected to the real world, why it matters, these kinds of things.
Yeah, I think too, one of the big challenges that firms are going to have in Australia is around the cost of performing KYC. So the corporate data, corporate registry in Australia that sits with ASIC actually sits behind a paywall. So
but the government should make that free.
So the government will be making money off that.
Really? The government takes with both hands, kind of.
Yeah, I'm not here to criticize the Australian government, but there'll be pushback, no doubt, from industry around the cost of doing that. This verifying to a reasonable standard, I think, there'll be argument as to what reasonable is and what reasonable isn't. However, I think there'll be a secondary push for some more corporate transparency in Australia.
That will be a good thing.
Yeah, I think it will be a good thing. I think if you look at the way how, for example, comparing Australia to the UK, where Companies House is a very transparent register. Same in Norway, same in a lot of European countries. There's not that level of transparency in Australia, free of charge.
Yeah, not free of charge. Maybe we will make some moves on the corporate transparency there. I think also if I were an MLCO right now, I would also try to get the CEO to listen to this podcast and get them to understand how important the tone from the top culture of compliance is. Because if you are an MLCO, and then the leadership or the board is like, no, this is not important, then it becomes really hard, right? So you need backing from the leadership team that this is important, we take it seriously, just start talking about it. Even though you're not fully educated yet, at least speak about it as if something you take super seriously.
Yeah, and also I think the cost of compliance is also a big challenge. So, those of us who work in the AML world know that so quite often you have a training vendor, you have a KYC, KYB vendor, you maybe bring in some consultants to write policy. All of these things cost money. And because this is happening at pace, not all businesses would have set aside sufficient funds for that. And it's something that boards need to be conscious of, not exactly a cheap exercise.
True. And especially now that we're going into, budget approval for next year's season, boards should be thinking about that and ask those questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
But before we end this episode, we are going to dish out some quick fire questions for you. Are you ready?
Go for it.
What would be your advice to any business in Tranche 2 who is yet to engage with this new ruling?
I would definitely start by doing some basic research and at least start by looking and engaging with the materials AUSTRAC have put out.
Which aspect will have the biggest impact on dirty money in Australia?
The biggest impact will be the amount of intelligence that AUSTRAC will now start to receive. So from those 3 major sectors that have never had to report intelligence to AUSTRAC before through SMRs, that is going to be the biggest impact, and that's going to be disseminated throughout all law enforcement in Australia.
Will this rollout prove to be a success or a flop?
I think it will be a success, but a staged success. In short answer, I think there'll be some realization. I think that the 4 phases of grief. We're in the denial is probably over. We're not quite at acceptance. I think it will be a success come the end of next year.
And finally, why do these new AML rules matter in the real world to Australian citizens?
They matter in the real world for Australian citizens because it's going to give them another level of protection against dirty money in the economy. And I think fundamentally that will benefit the Australian economy and the Australian people.
That brings this spin of the laundry to an end. Adam, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find and connect with you?
Yes, so the best place will be on either my LinkedIn or connect on our website, which is Ryva, RYVA.ai.
Money makes a world go round.
And I encourage everyone to go and check it out, especially if you're in Australia. Send Adam a message if you are worried about the new AML legislation in Australia. Thanks to everyone who was tuning in and spent this half hour with us. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, you can go check out the back catalog. We have more than 130 episodes now, and follow The Laundry on your podcast platform of choice. Please share the podcast on your social media channels, tell a colleague to subscribe, maybe give us a 5-star rating. It really helps people to find us, and we really, really appreciate it. And if you got something interesting you want to share with us, or maybe you have an idea for a podcast, send us a message, comment on LinkedIn, or email us at laundry@strise.ai. Your host for this episode was me, Marit. Our producer was Matthew. Our editor was Dominic. And The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise. We build AML automation software. Visit strise.ai for more information. See you next time.
Michael Baldwin, this is Bruce. Michael Baldwin, this is Bruce. Michael Baldwin, this is Bruce.
Is your name not Bruce then?
No, it's Michael. That's going to cause a little confusion.
The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise, your AML automation software for faster onboarding, smarter monitoring, and growth without overhead.